Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Underground. This is the Intel update for December 28th through January 4th, 2025. Happy New Year, everyone. It would seem that we have most certainly kicked off the new year very, very kinetically, so let's get right to it. But before we get into it, I briefly wanted to mention that I'm going to try to, like I always do, but I feel like I need to say this, I'm going to try to cover this as delicately as I possibly can. And I think this is for two reasons, right? We're in the era of social media. We're in the era of rapid information and rapid analysis on that information. And unfortunately, sometimes we tend to forget two things. Two things which have become very, very important to remember over the past week. The first of which is real people have lost their lives, okay? Real people have lost their lives due to attacks that have occurred this week. Again, we'll get into it in a moment. But this is not just some made-up game here, right? So when we talk about these sorts of things, and if we want to slap the false flag label on a lot of things, or we want to say this is all just a psyop, right? I think that tends to dismiss the fact that real people died, okay? I've seen a lot of people, throw their analysis out there and make some pretty compelling points, but I think that we really do need to remember that the families of these people, the families of the victims, are on social media too, okay? And how would you feel if you had lost a family member and some memer on social media says, "Don't worry about it, it's just a psyop"? That may be the case, okay? It may be a psyop. It may be heavily influenced. There may be a lot of questionable details. There may be some grand conspiracy. Fine, let's just assume that's true. But we still have to remember that people lost their lives, right? So I just wanted to put that kind of general thought out there. I think I'm the only one who's kind of mentioned that sort of thing. The other idea is something less important, but it's really more of an understanding that, look, we're dealing at this point, when it comes to information and the flow of news stories and ideas and theories, and some true, some not, the flow or manipulation of information, right? A lot of times, we're dealing with people's religion here. A lot of times people have a very spiritual or religious belief system. It's not necessarily what we might consider to be a normal religion. Some people believe in certain things so strongly that you will not root that out of them. It's not going to happen. And as strange as it sounds, this even applies with current events. Like a couple weeks ago, I caught untold amounts of flack about the whole drone crisis in New Jersey because I got a lot of hate mail from people who just down deep in their soul believed that, X event was true, or this detail was true, or so on and so forth. It's not my job, or it's not my place to disprove that or try to change anybody's mind. I'm just trying to present information. So, in doing so, I'm trying to keep that in mind, is the detail that, look, some people believe so strongly in some things that you will never root them out. And sometimes, unfortunately, this is at odds with a more well-reasoned, measured, well thought out kind of thought process. So again, I wanted to make that abundantly clear right up front that one, it doesn't really matter what you think, because real people are dead at the end of the day. That's thing one. And thing two, we're talking about things that require a lot more delicacy than you might ordinarily give a standard news story, right? So that's the kind of thing I wanted to outline first, because I know that a lot of people are going to get upset with what I have to say later. So all of that out of the way, let's talk about the Louisiana incident first. So as many of you know, there was a terror attack on Bourbon Street in Louisiana, in New Orleans, that took the form of a vehicle ramming attack. Again, vehicle ramming attacks are an extremely common threat vector that the United States is perhaps not as prepared for, along with Europe, perhaps not as prepared for as we might want to believe. In any case, the suspect, Shamsuddin Jabbar, allegedly drove his vehicle, or drove a rented vehicle, into a crowd of people on Bourbon Street on New Year's, who were celebrating the kind of New Year's festivities there. Right up front, the kind of general assumption is this is more of an Islamic-based attack sort of thing, because it kind of bears these hallmarks, right? You've got vehicle attack, the assailant gets out of the vehicle, starts shooting at people. This is what we might call a complex coordinated attack, or CCA. This acronym varies and has varied widely over the years in the terms of counterterrorism doctrine, but most of the time, old hands will just call it a complex attack, meaning that the assailant targeted his target using one or more people or one or more weapons. And in this case, his primary weapon was his vehicle. That is what he chose to initiate the attack, right? If we're trying to use more doctrinal terms, he chose to initiate the attack using a vehicle. Once that phase, again, using more doctrinal terms, once that phase of the attack was complete, he then proceeded to the secondary phase, which was him getting out of the vehicle and shooting people. So again, now we've switched weapons. Now we're meeting the definition of a complex attack. And finally, after the entire incident was over, we discovered, as is very, very common, we discovered that there was a third phase of the attack that took the form of explosives inside his vehicle. So he had made some homemade pipe bombs, and so far I have not seen any indication as to whether or not they were viable. I know the FBI was investigating, local EOD was also investigating because they were the first on the scene, obviously. But I don't know if he had planned to do the classic jihadi tactic of ram your vehicle into the crowd, get out, shoot as many people as possible, and then after your part of the attack is done, your vehicle explodes. This would be a classic textbook Al-Qaeda style attack, right? That goes back many, many, many years. Now again, just because this guy is using a very well-known insurgent tactic, this does not necessarily mean that he was in fact himself an insurgent. Now, most of the rhetoric and discourse following the investigation into this individual, Shamsuddin Jabbar, seems to indicate, at least the very, very top wave tops of this, seems to indicate that he recently became radicalized, wanted to or had already joined ISIS to carry out some sort of attack. Now, again, that part of the story is very, very much in the category of unknowns. Okay, this is an intelligence gap. We do not know if he was an actual member of ISIS or just a wannabe kind of thing. Anybody can order an ISIS flag off the internet. Anybody can just order a plain black flag off the internet and hand paint it, which is possibly what he did, in reference to, of course, the ISIS flag that was recovered from the scene. It's a little bit off in terms of its construction, but in any case, when we look outside of the attack over to the land of insurgents on the internet, so far I haven't found any indication that any sort of mainline ISIS sect or cell has claimed this guy. Now again, ISIS has taken kind of a beating over the past few years as an organization, so it's a little bit harder to gauge whether or not they are as effective as they claim they are. For instance, one guy with iMovie on his 2008 grade laptop can make a pretty convincing ISIS video in terms of production quality. They all are pretty well low in quality, right? So ISIS releasing a statement, or it can just be some guy on the internet claiming to be ISIS, but not really. So again, it would be a little bit of a different story if it was Al-Qaeda, if it was HTS, their new kind of sort of subsidiary brand name, I guess. But for the most part, I haven't seen any indications that this guy was actually ISIS. None of the big accounts that I know of, I mean, they've talked about it, but they haven't claimed him. So I'm not entirely certain if this is an indication of more to come, and this is important due to the details of the actual event itself. As many of you know, immediately following the incident, counterterrorism resources locally actually did a good job, and they assessed that there may have been more of a threat, right? So again, when a terror attack occurs, we have to assume that there may be more, right? When one bomb goes off, there may be more, right? So that's what the local kind of response was. One vehicle attack, there may be more, so let's scour things and let's be a little bit more cautious, right? So they identify several people around the city that may have been in proximity to the alleged explosives that were planted around the French Quarter. They review security tapes, and just out of an abundance of caution, they say that there may have been 3 or 4 more other people. So as the investigation goes on, we either find out one of two things. Either one, he really was alone, and this was all just kind of a lone wolf kind of thing, or the cell is bigger than just this one guy, and the other people are still being hunted down. This is, again, where we get into uncertainty land. We don't really know. So that's kind of where we're at, right? A lot of speculation, a lot of unknowns, unfortunately. So again, when we err on the side of caution, right, what does that mean? Well, it means that until we're given other information, follow-on information, additional details, until we find them out ourselves, right? Because the feds are really not going to tell us anything productive. So Until we know more information and we can gauge this risk, we can assess this risk ourselves, we have to kind of assume that the risk is a little bit higher, right? So even though right now it looks like this individual was probably a lone wolf, we can't entirely, in the open source world, rule out that this guy may have had other contacts that are planning similar attacks. Again, you see this sort of thing being, you kind of catch this sort of atmospheric from the feds as well, because, moving down to Washington, D.C., a couple of days ago, or rather overnight, the Pentagon very quietly suspended the Trusted Traveler program at all military bases in the U.S. So every single military base in the United States is operating at a heightened threat perspective. I don't know if they've changed force protection levels. I do know they have at a couple of installations, but there doesn't seem to be any directive with regards to nationwide FEPCON level change. Again, the FEPCON levels generally change based on locals, the local base commanders' kind of guidance, right? But the Trusted Traveler program is a nationwide program, so if you're going to stop it at one base, you might as well stop it nationwide. So again, additional screenings of people coming onto military bases is going to be undertaken. So for all the military guys out there watching, get ready for long lines going into the base on Monday. So that's probably going to be a nightmare. So give yourself a little bit extra time to transit on Monday, right? For those not in the military who may not know what this means, essentially a lot of military bases around the United States have automated systems where you just scan your ID, the gate comes up and you can go on. You don't have to have a gate guard there. And it's a rapid, expedited process for people who are like truck drivers or vendors or exchange employees or something like that. It's a way to get you quickly on the base because you work on the base and you're vetted already. It's a sort of like TSA pre-check for getting on a military base. Ironically, TSA pre-check is underneath this Trusted Traveler program. There's like a dozen different other ones. The program, I forget the name of it, to allow truckers to come back and forth between the United States and Canada really quickly. That's another program that's nested underneath this. So I don't know if this is a whole nationwide stopping of the whole thing. I don't know about that. I figured we probably would have heard about it if TSA PreCheck was shut down. But really, when the U.S. military bases stateside in the United States are saying, we're going to increase our security posture, that's a huge indicator. So again, clearly, what I think doesn't matter. What I can come up with doesn't really matter. I'm just some random guy on the internet, right? But look at what the feds are doing. Clearly, the feds think that something is increasing the threat, right? That's one of those indicators that we can lean on for an assessment, right? It's a piece of information. It's a data point that we can process into actual intelligence, right? It's not just some guess. So we can make the general assessment that considering that the Vegas bomber, which I'll get to in a moment, and this guy, the Bourbon Street attacker, both have military affiliation, and now military bases around the country are increasing their threat posture. What can we surmise from that? Well, really, it could be anything, but clearly we have an unknown data point out there that is causing the Pentagon and the feds to act differently. So they think that the threat posture needs to be increased, so that's what they've done. Again, we have to operate a lot of times with incomplete information. So moving forward, the enduring concerns with this specific Louisiana attack, this New Orleans attack, really the two thoughts that I have that remain pertinent moving forward are, one, the investigation process itself. We have already seen investigative journalists contaminate crime scenes. The FBI leave behind critical evidence that could be used for a follow-on investigation, right? So this kind of thing is very, very important, and the investigative integrity of this sort of investigation is just very, very poor quality. Okay, I'll leave it like that. And the other concern is because of this poor investigation quality, we may actually have follow-on threats that occur, right? If this guy was a jihadi, some kind of ISIS-affiliated terrorist or something like that, and he wasn't a lone wolf, if he was in a cell, then that means that you've got other people out there and the threat is not over, right? Just because this guy's dead, because from this incident, just because he died in the attack does not mean it's over. There could be other people, right? So again, erring on the side of caution, one would think that our nationwide counterterrorism groups would be mindful of this and kind of assume this might be the case, right? But again, this is a big, wide can, right? And I don't want to kind of open it up too much. Just want to kind of cover the highlights today. So let's move over to the other can of worms, which is the Vegas car bombing incident. As many of you have already seen and followed throughout the week, on the same day as the Louisiana attack, another attack was getting underway in Las Vegas. An assailant who has allegedly been identified as Matthew Livelsberger, an active duty soldier in 10th Special Forces Group, rented a Tesla Cybertruck and filled it with fuel canisters, gasoline, and fireworks, drove it up to the front doors of the Trump Hotel in Vegas, and detonated it. Again, the details of this specific attack are rather grisly, so I'm not going to go into that so much. However, his remains, or the remains of someone, were allegedly recovered from inside the vehicle. As far as the public knows, it is really hard to lean on whether or not this person was indeed Matthew Livelsberger, or if there was maybe a body double involved in this one. I don't know personally because I don't have DNA testing capabilities myself, right? I'm not involved in this investigation, so I can't say for sure. But just to address this claim right up front, somebody knows. If this guy deployed overseas with a special forces group, I find it very, very hard to believe that his DNA is not on file with the U.S. government in terms of, say, him becoming a prisoner of war, right? This is not something that's done for every soldier, right? But this guy, being who he was, and the people and the associations and the units that he was associated with, I find it very hard to believe that somebody doesn't know if this body is him or not. The feds have already come out and said that the body who was in the driver's seat of the vehicle, the DNA of those remains did not match that of his son. However, I don't know if that's an indicator that we can do much with, because it seems like that can be used to drive a few different narratives. So I'm just going to say that I'm aware of that right now. I'm aware of these details, but again, very, very little to go on with this specific case. More generally, more broadly, however, this incident, the information that we have received post-attack, seems to strongly indicate some things that kind of alleviate some concerns. For instance, this appears to be more of a one-and-done kind of thing. This does not appear to be a terror cell kind of jihadi, al-Qaeda thing going on. This is just one guy. So this definitely seems to be like it's more of a lone wolf kind of incident. I guess we'll have to call it an incident, because it does not really meet a lot of the criteria for thinking about it in terms of a more coordinated terror attack. That's the best way I can think of describing it. And the reason that I'm having to be very delicate and very deliberate with what I'm trying to say here with this specific incident is due to some questionable details that have come out regarding an alleged manifesto, if you will, that was found and released online last night, right? So again, for those of you who probably don't know, this is all over the internet now, but just in case you haven't understood what's going on here, Sam Shoemate, who runs the Terminal CWO kind of media group, right, social media platform that handles a lot of things in terms of, he's been very active over the past few years with regards to military investigations, combating fraud, waste, and abuse in the military, things like that. He got a message from the bomber himself, and the bomber wanted to make sure that the Sean Ryan show, again of recent fame, got the message, right? So this has rapidly become a snowball kind of incident, right? So I thought I would just show you, for the record, the manifesto letter email as provided by the Sean Ryan Show. Again, if you want to check out the primary source, again, for this information, I will link that episode below. I don't really like having to, I would really have preferred to wait to address this. But again, time is of the essence with something like this, and unfortunately, so many people have tagged me in this, and so many people have sent me messages and emails. I feel like if I didn't address it, it would be disingenuous, right? So again, this is the main part of the manifesto. There have been other communications if you want to check out, again, all of the primary sources for this information. This is the person who this was directly sent to. I will link all the relevant social media accounts below. I'm just a messenger. Please don't shoot me, right? The reason that this is such a powerful and interesting and earth-shattering kind of thing, I would much rather have preferred to talk about this in terms of like just a basic terror attack, this has been kind of a long time coming. I would much rather that remain in the realm of counterterrorism. That's what I'm personally more comfortable with. But again, what I feel comfortable with doesn't matter. The work's got to go on, right? So before I tear into this, let me set the stage a little bit, right? So let's talk about what we know, okay, with regards to this Vegas incident. Not a lot of information came out when it first occurred, but here's what we know. And spoiler alert, it's not much. We do know that Matthew Livelsberger conducted the attack at the Trump Tower in Las Vegas. This is something that we know, again, with that huge caveat, within reason, okay? This is still an assessment. We do not 100,000 million% know that this guy actually did the attack, was driving the vehicle, things like that. Again, I know that I'm taking a little bit of analytical liberty here, but I think that this is the best we have to go on, so please just bear with me, okay? We have to go from somewhere, right? And this is what we've got. So we're just going to go with the assumption right now that Matthew Livelsberger conducted the attack, was involved with the attack, was somehow related to something to do with this incident, okay? The other detail that we know is the letter itself, the email that was sent to eventually the Sean Ryan show. The feds have come out, law enforcement agencies have come out and said that they believe that it is indeed a genuine communication from the bomber, from the attacker. So again, this is a little bit of an analytical leap, right, in terms of trust. Nobody trusts the feds. The FBI saying that something's real doesn't necessarily mean something. They've already lied. They already lied about the New Orleans attack. So the FBI's word doesn't necessarily mean a lot, but let's just go with it. Let's just go with it for now, because this will matter in just a moment, okay? So the manifesto, the letter, the email, the communications between the bomber and some of these larger social media kind of personas, let's just go with the assumption that these communications are genuinely from the bomber. It's not just some scammer out there, okay? Let's go with this assumption at the moment. And thirdly, probably the most important thing is that this probably, because this is a one-and-done kind of thing, this does not give any indications and warnings that this is a more widespread thing. So again, there probably won't be follow-on attacks related to this specific Vegas thing. This is a one-and-done political, would you call it a political statement, I guess? A statement, right? So it's not something that a whole lot of people are going to be involved in. It was just this one guy. That's probably the most certain thing that we know so far. Unknowns. Let's talk about what we don't know. Basically everything. Everything else we don't know. We don't know of if any of the information in the actual manifesto itself is true. We do not know this yet. Some of the information can be verified. The other parts of the information, there is absolutely zero way of verifying. But some of the information we can, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. And again, another unknown is Matthew Livelsberger himself. We do not know if Master Sergeant Livelsberger was the guy in the vehicle. We do not know for 100% certainty that that was him. We do not know his status, right? There have been some indications to suggest that maybe some of the communications platforms that he used were active, at least after his death, after his alleged death. I do not know about this. There would need to be a forensic audit of this sort of thing before we can really say this is what happened. So again, unknowns are pretty much everything. Now, before we get way down deep into this, I want to switch gears for a second and remind everyone of two things. One, that we need to be okay or understand. You may not want to accept it, okay? But we need to understand that sometimes we have to make decisions based on incomplete information. As a matter of fact, that's most of our human existence, is it not? We will never get the full and total truth on pretty much anything. There are some things, sure, but for the most part, when we go about and we live our daily lives, we're only getting 80% of the truth. And arguably today, it's probably down to 20% of the truth. So we have to be okay with operating in a state of 80%, of uncertainty, right? So we have to understand that it doesn't make it right, it doesn't make it wrong, it doesn't mean it's good, it doesn't mean it's bad. That's just what it is, okay? Uncertainty abounds. We have to be okay with making decisions in that uncertainty. And because of that, the second thing is that time is linear, okay? We're going to make decisions, okay? Some time is going to elapse, and we're going to be able to look back on those decisions, okay? We're going to be able to look back on those assessments. And sometimes you make a decision that, or you have a thought or you have an idea that you wait a couple of years down the line and you look back and you say, oh my gosh, that was so stupid, right? Who hasn't had that thought, right? So the fact of the matter is that we can look back with this is where we get the phrase hindsight is 20/20, right? Because the implication being at the time our vision isn't so clear, but as time goes on we get more details, we understand more of the situation. Well, then our eyewitness testimony at the time becomes a little bit nonsensical sometimes. This happens a lot in the world of criminal investigation. You've got a witness who says something, okay? Then time elapses from the incident. Time goes on, like it always does, right? Time continues until, say, the trial. Okay, then the witness has a different story as time has gone by. Well, what has happened? That witness has taken on additional information along this period of time, and they have put together the pieces of what really happened. And they have sometimes subconsciously changed their original eyewitness testimony. This is why a lot of times when an event occurs and a witness, it's so crucial in the world of intel, at least, it's so crucial. As soon as an event happens, tell that witness, or if you're interviewing them, you can get that witness to write down with pen and paper, not typing it, write it down by hand, what they saw. That way, when 2 weeks elapses, you can show them these notes again, or you can ask them about what's in the contents of these notes, and 9 times out of 10, they're not going to remember some things they wrote down. Or they're going to say, there's no way I wrote that down. Well, yeah, here it is, in your own handwriting. So, all of that is to say, we may have an opinion today, and 2 years down the line, we may look back at that and say, how could we have been so stupid? Well, we weren't being stupid. We're being just as stupid as we are every day, right? No change in the level of stupid. It's just that as time goes on, we get more information, and we forget that human beings are rational beings, not in terms of sanity or anything. Human beings are rational in that they take in information, they process it, and then they make decisions based off of that information. Keeping the original perspective is super, super important, because today we can have an assessment, and again, a year from now, we can say, well, there's no way that we thought that. Well, yeah, there is, because you have to remember, again, what information was available to us at the time. This is super crucial, because I guarantee you that in 2 months, we're going to look back at this whole thing and say, oh, there's no way. There's no way we thought that, or whatever our opinions were. So, and all of this digression, as again, I know I am prone to do sometimes, most of the time, all the time. This is important because of how I think we should be approaching this information that's in this manifesto. And that is simply like this. Let's just take a break for a moment. Again, let's digress from the digression once more. And let's say that you have been presented with some level of information, right? The source is a single person, okay? You've been given some information, and the information that you have been given cannot be verified at all. It's just impossible. There's no way that you could feasibly verify the information, okay? Now, did you believe the information, or did you not believe the information? What was your first gut instinct? Did you start off by believing the information, and then from that moment on, the very moment that you heard it, you believed it, and then you took steps to reinforce your own belief? Or did you do the opposite? And the very minute you heard that information, you said, absolutely not true. There's no way this is true, and I'm going to find every piece of evidence that says it's not true. Where did you instinctively go? Okay? This is an important thing to remember, because in the world of analysis, we can't even take that first step. We should never be operating from this perspective of it's true and I'm going to prove it's true, or it's false and I'm going to prove it's false. We have to be more empirical with this kind of approach, right? So again, just take me for instance. I mean, is there any way that I can have an opinion on this without people immediately saying that I'm in on it either way? If I completely agree with the manifesto in terms of it being true, if I say everything in the manifesto is true, then some people are going to say I'm in on it. And if I say it's all false, well, other people are going to say that I'm in on it too, right? It's just one side of the coin. So it's a hard perspective to have. And I would like everyone to kind of encourage that, not just with me, but with other people too, right? Like if someone says something that is against what you personally think, what would it take to change your mind? Don't try to think that people are trying to change your mind. Just ask yourself, what would it take for someone to change your mind if they wanted to? If somebody wanted to honestly and genuinely help you learn something, okay, and help you change your perspective to be more, better, I guess, what would it take? Like, is there anything that would change your mind on something? I mean, some things it's perfectly okay to have a hard and fast, I will die before I change my belief on this. That's perfectly respectable. As a matter of fact, we should all have those beliefs, right? In some ways. The issue is that does that apply with this? Is this the same kind of mentality? I don't know. It's up for you to decide, but I'm just trying to say that if I say something that you disagree with, then at what point would there ever be a point to where you could concede that I may be right? Anyway, all in all, this doesn't really matter because, like I have here on the slide, a more Bayesian thinking kind of process is probably more effective than anything else. Essentially, after reading this manifesto and the strangeness contained within, does it really change how you're going to behave at the end of the day? Probably not that much. I mean, we're all kind of preparing for some really wacky and crazy times, so at the end of the day, as strange as this information is, it doesn't really change that much, really. It doesn't, for the average person at least. For governance, yeah, sure, maybe, but in terms of the average person out there, guess what? I'm going to be operating the same today as I was yesterday before I knew any of this information. So, like I said in the beginning, I don't really want to get into this too much because what I think really doesn't matter, and I think that me discussing some of this is going to be perceived as me attacking like someone's belief system, which I don't want to do. So, what I did want to do, though, is highlight some of the issues that I have identified myself from within the manifesto itself, that you don't really need a whole lot of sources or information to back up. You can just read it and maybe have a thought, right? That's all I'm trying to do here, right? Again, when it comes to the world of trust, nobody has any trust anymore. Nobody trusts the Sean Ryan Show. Nobody trusts Sam Shoemate. Nobody trusts me, right? Good, fine, that's perfect. Like, figure it out for yourself, right? Learn how to verify information. It's okay, and it's probably a good thing at this point that we're operating in a zero trust environment, right? But because of that, it unfortunately means that the concept of reputation doesn't really matter anymore. And if people were expecting reputation to matter, well, sorry, but it doesn't. The reputation doesn't matter anymore for the most part. But in any case, let's go through some of these things that I've identified. I have identified many, many contradictions and issues and suspicious points with this manifesto, but I'm just going to cover the ones that are the most glaringly obvious, okay? We can get into this more in due time, but I think that after I run through these, you may have a different understanding of some things. So, let's start with the very first thing. Okay, rule number 1. Okay, if you're going to write a manifesto and you're going to try to authenticate it or verify it, pick something that is actually verifiable, okay? Because one of the very first things that jumped out at me is this guy says, my first car was a 2006 black Ford Mustang V6 for verification. How in the world am I supposed to verify that, okay? For one, the rest of the manifesto, just to read ahead a little bit, is a little bit critical of the U.S. government, okay? Who are the only people that have access to what vehicles you owned? Either your close family friends, or people who saw you on social media, or the feds, okay? So 2 taintable groups of people. If you're going to provide verification of something, you had better well provide something that is going to be like inside knowledge that only you would know, okay, and inside knowledge that we can verify independently. This is a lot of times what happens when you have whistleblowers come out, and the first instinct is, well, who's to say you're a whistleblower? Like, who's to say you're not just some kook on the internet, right? This is one of those things, it's a huge alarm bell, right? When you pick a method of authentication that can be duplicated by anybody who was Facebook friends with this guy in 2006 probably saw a black Ford Mustang V6. So one of his Facebook buddies could have been writing this email. So we already have problems right off the bat with verification, okay? But in any case, let's trudge on. For now, I'm going to skip over, I know, what you guys do not want me to skip over, which is the bulk of the email here about these Chinese submarines and gravitic propulsion systems. Again, if you are trying to whistleblow, for any potential whistleblower out there, if you're trying to whistleblow, please give us more than just this, okay? But we'll get to that in a minute. The next thing that kind of jumped out at me was something that didn't make a whole lot of sense, and maybe some of you could put it together and make some sense of it. I don't know. But this guy says multiple times here in the purple boxed highlights and underlines here, this guy says that he is very much concerned about surveillance. They're tracking him, right? Okay, they're tracking him. Okay, fair enough, whatever. But this guy then goes out and rents one of the most ridiculously recognizable vehicles in the history of the world. There are people in mud huts in Uganda that know what a Cybertruck looks like. Not to mention the fact that the Cybertruck is literally covered in cameras, electronic surveillance, and all kinds of monitoring things. It is literally a smartphone on wheels. This thing is a security nightmare. And this guy who's concerned about the feds tracking him goes out of his way to get one of the, I don't know, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Again, another detail that kind of like doesn't make a lot of sense is in the context of this message itself. So either the guy's in hiding and trying to hide and trying to conceal his actions and keep all this secret, or he's trying to whistleblow. You can't be both, man. Like, at a certain point in time, whistleblow, right? And this is the kind of thing that I don't really understand so much. Because at a certain point, anonymity is very, very dangerous, right? If this guy was so concerned that the feds were tracking him for some reason, maybe because he intended to whistleblow, I don't know, get the information out there, that makes it harder for them to take you out, right? So I don't know what is going on here. If the most dangerous thing that any human being can do in the United States, if they have information the government does not want them to have, the worst possible thing they can do is stay in the United States and keep that information to themselves, right? The government will erase you, and there will be no way for anyone to ever know you ever existed, right? This is very, very easy. So at a certain point, anonymity is fatal. It guarantees they're going to come after you. It's easier to silence you than it is to refute your information later on, right? So it doesn't make a lot of sense. Somebody who's going to whistleblow and still remain anonymous, I mean, that may happen, but with the U.S. government, it's probably not a super great idea, right? I don't know. Just my thinking. Just my line of thinking here. Also, again, reference to VBIED, Vehicle-Borne Improvised Explosive Device. This sentence here kind of makes me question things because it says, they're looking to move on me and are unlikely to let me cross into Mexico, but won't because they know I am armed and I have a massive VBIED. Not to be indelicate or anything, but I would have imagined that somebody who's stellar enough to be a part of 10th Group would know that what he had in the trunk of that Cybertruck was not a massive VBIED. Okay? So the fact that he's calling it a VBIED makes me think, did he really think this was an explosive device? Some fireworks and gasoline? It makes me question things. It makes me question things a lot. And again, I don't mean to be indelicate, but we're talking about national level terrorism here, so sorry if I'm hurting some feelings out there, but seriously, like, we got to wonder, okay? Was this guy, thinking all together there, or was this a demonstration of proficiency? I don't know, but I guess we'll have to figure that out. So, again, something that I will talk about here in just a moment. I'll skip forward to it. This paragraph about Afghanistan. Funny enough, I was in Afghanistan, apparently, when this guy was. So he makes some claims about airstrikes in Nimruz province in 2019. I was in Afghanistan in 2019, so I immediately started combing through my memory and my notes to figure out if this guy was telling the truth or what in the Sam Hill was going on, because this paragraph here is very interesting to me. Again, for those of you who maybe not know, I'm just some random guy on the internet, but I just did a couple of months ago a video on targeting, right? And a lot of the examples that I used and a lot of the sources I cited were from Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, places like that. So again, I know that the differences in vernacular from, say, a 10th Group guy, the word targeting might mean something different to him than to me, who's in the deliberate and dynamic targeting world, right? Like bombs from airplanes kind of thing. He may have been talking about human targeting, He may have been talking about human targeting in terms of snatch and grabs and things like that, which is more along the lines of what a Green Beret would have been doing in Afghanistan at that time. But anyway, let's go through some of the claims here that are made with regards to what he alleges is a CivCAS incident, a civilian casualty thing. The military accidentally killing somebody when they didn't mean to. Now, CivCAS generally applies to airstrikes. Bombing a building, somebody's kid gets killed or bomb lands in the wrong place. Horrible, horrible stuff, right? CivCAS does happen. I will not say that it doesn't. It does happen, and it happens in some ways more than you think, but in some ways less than you think. And that matters here in just a moment from what my own testimony is, I suppose. But anyway, I've gotten a whole documentary or long video on targeting, kinetic targeting, the introduction to deliberate targeting. So that's the kind of perspective I'm coming at this from, so please forgive me if I'm injecting any personal bias into this that isn't helpful, right? Biases don't necessarily mean that they're bad. I'm just trying to clarify some things because I guess this kind of affects what I used to do. Anyway, this guy makes some pretty bold claims here, okay? CivCAS claims, very serious stuff, very horrific, okay? So he's claiming that there was some kind of airstrike in Nimruz province, down south, TAC South, or at the time AOB South, it depends on which echelon of command you worked for. And that matters because of his vernacular here in just a second. Anyway, he claims that I conducted targeting for these strikes of over 125 buildings. 65 were struck because of CivCAS. They killed hundreds of civilians in a single day. I'm just going to be honest with you guys. I don't know what in the Sam Hill he's talking about here because it doesn't make a lot of sense. So is he trying to say that 125 buildings were struck and that there were 65 buildings that have CivCAS? Or is he trying to say that out of the 125, only 65 were struck and half of these targets were canceled because there were CivCAS concerns? So do you see where this perspective matters? Because if this guy's trying to claim that a war crime occurred, bro, your first sentence here is telling us that there were CivCAS mitigation efforts. It's pretty hard to sell that, you're a war criminal, and you're such a war criminal, you're such a bad person, you're such a bad guy, that you decided to not strike half of the targets you planned to because you were afraid of killing civilians. Do you see how that makes no sense at all? So I don't know if he's trying to say that 65 targets had CivCAS, or is he trying to say that 65 were struck because the other half had CivCAS concerns? I literally do not know. And maybe somebody out there can theorize otherwise. But anyway, the last part of that sentence is the part that makes no sense to me either. That killed hundreds of civilians in a single day. That is a very big and bold claim. And as with all big and bold claims, there's going to be a record of it somewhere. So you can find, and again, I will link it below if I can find it again. There was a United Nations investigation from the UN, and I forget the name of their CivCAS agency at the time. The name is right on the tip of my tongue, but I can't remember it. Anyway, the United Nations investigates CivCAS allegations on their own, which there's a long story there. But anyway, that's for another time. Anyway, the United Nations has this alleged CivCAS department, and they investigate these sorts of things. And there was a report about a CivCAS incident in Nimruz province, a pretty big one, in 2019. But it wasn't on a single day, okay? The United States government in 2019, believe it or not, was not striking that much stuff in Afghanistan. Think about it. The war was ending. The war was almost to a close. We're not bombing stuff like 2003 again. So I don't know what's going on here. I was in TAC East, Train, Advise, Assist Command East. The name should give it away. The mission for U.S. forces at the time was not to bomb stuff, really. It did happen a lot. But it was all train, advise, and assist. That's what the mission of the U.S. government was at the time, under General Miller, right? That was what the goal was. Train, advise, and assist the Afghans. We were there to try to hand over control to them at that time of the war. If he had said this was earlier on, many, many years ago, I'd have believed him. But now you're telling me that at the end of the war, when nobody was doing anything and everybody was told to sit on their hands, especially all the Green Beret guys who got told to sit down and shut up and don't ever, leave the wire or anything, because their command at the time was very, very risk averse. You're going to tell me that we killed hundreds of civilians in a day when there probably weren't 100 airstrikes that year, at least in my whole region. Now, granted, again, this is across the country, so it is possible that I'm just all blowing smoke here. But this detail, from me, I was there, okay? This makes no sense to me. Hundreds of civilians? Hundreds? I would get messages or emails all the time from all the way over in Uruzgan, all the way up in like Mez Sharif, all the way over on the other side of the country about how a helicopter assault force raid, half raid, was conducted, and one of the Afghan trainees accidentally shot a kid or something. That made national news at the time. I would have heard about this if this had happened and this was a big deal. So my thinking is this. One, it happened, and it really did happen. Okay, it probably really did happen, but I didn't hear about it at the time. It could have been that the United Nations did an investigation after I was already said and done, and I was moved on, I was gone, talking about something that happened in 2019. So my guess is that that's probably what happened. So again, we're talking about discrepancies with eyewitness testimony, right? Just because I didn't see it with my own two eyes doesn't mean it didn't happen. But I feel like, I don't know. I mean, Attack South was, AOB South in particular was, it just doesn't, I don't know. Maybe I'm all washed up, I don't know. But either way, okay, the next part of this sentence is utter hogwash, okay? This is utter ridiculous, okay? This is completely false and completely made up. And everybody knows this, okay? This is blue part right here. It was supposed to take 6 minutes and scramble all aircraft in CENTCOM. What are you talking about? There is no way on this earth that you could scramble all aircraft in CENTCOM. Are you serious? This is not how this works. Like, look, I worked with aviation in Afghanistan. I would have known if they were going to scramble every aircraft. You're going to tell me that they got every aircraft in CENTCOM to do this targeting in Afghanistan? I don't know. That's just completely ridiculous to me. It sounds to me like someone who has never done targeting, to be honest. It sounds like what you might read on Reddit. Because we all know how this works, don't we? Just hop on the tactical gear, whatever, Reddit forums, and you can see a lot of people who like to pick up these vernacular terms from all these special operators, and they try to pick up these terms, and then they try to use them in a sentence, similarly to how they learned it, but they do it incorrectly, and it's like the shibboleth thing, right? You immediately know, okay? You immediately know, this person has no idea what they're talking about. Scramble all aircraft in CENTCOM. What are you smoking? This is ridiculous. It was supposed to take 6 minutes. So you're telling me scramble every aircraft, hundreds, if not thousands of aircraft in CENTCOM to be on target in 6 minutes? The logistics are impossible. Okay? Because think about where the airfields are at. You're talking about you would have to line up 2,000 aircraft at Kandahar, and you have to line up 1,000 or 2,000 aircraft at Bagram, and you probably have to get dudes all the way from Met. It would be a logistical nightmare. Look, and here's my point of evidence. Look at how damned impossible it was for any sort of logistics to work for the Kabul crisis. Okay, where the mission was not to continue the war that had been going on for 20 years, but the mission was to get women and children out, and we could barely handle the logistics of that. We had to rely on other NATO partners, other members to help us out with the Kabul crisis, right? The British in particular, and the Spanish. Even the Italians helped us out, right? So think about that. Does that make any sense at all? It doesn't. It just tells me that this is not the way that it is. So again, we've got some pretty sketchy stuff here already building up with that blue sentence right there. Now, here's the kicker. Here's something else that you guys may want to be aware of. Some homework for later, right? A little bit of investigation on your own. This acronym, US4A right here. First of all, he's written it incorrectly twice. It's USFOR-A. A forgivable error, but it's still an error nonetheless. And what he's referring to here is U.S. Forces Afghanistan. Big Army is what we used to call this, right? This is the overall effort for the conventional forces in Afghanistan. Now, here's the thing that is very, very important. To my knowledge, at least what I was involved in, there were two military campaigns going on at the time. There was Operation Resolute Support and Operation Freedom's Sentinel. These two operations were very, very different. And what's interesting about this is that, one, obviously, Resolute Support. It's got support in the name. What do you think it's about? Well, it's really for supporting the Afghans. This is how this would go, right? This is one of those things where the rules of engagement, for instance, for Resolute Support were very, very stringent, at least as far as I was told, right? It's basically self-defense only, let the Afghans handle their own country, right? So the kind of thing that you would, kind of hope that we would transition to at some point. Operation Freedom Sentinel, that was the older one. That was basically GWAT as we know it. So I say that because this guy would probably not really have been associating with Big Army at the time. So why is he talking about US-4A and not SOCCENT and not SOTF-A? Special Operations Task Force Afghanistan. Those are the dudes who are doing most of these strikes, right? ANSOF, Afghan National Special Operations Forces, right? Their version of Special Forces, right? These were the dudes who were doing most of this, right? That's kind of how this worked. So I'm very curious as to why he thinks the US-4A was doing anything, really. US-4A was sitting on their hands. They weren't doing any strikes in Afghanistan. Nothing, not that I know of, at least. I mean, sure, some here and there, but you're talking about US-4A, conventional forces. Why does no one ever remember this? You're talking about scrambling all the aircraft in CENTCOM for a 6-minute mission? I don't know, man. That doesn't sound right. So it's really sketchy, right? It's already very sketchy. And now he's mentioned US-4A. And here's the funny thing about US-4A. US-4A, Big Army in Afghanistan, was very risk averse, okay? They didn't want to do anything. And I'll tell you how risk averse they were. US-4A in Afghanistan was so risk averse that one of the only coins that I got for my time there involved doing a targeting mission, right? In TAC East, okay? I know you can probably get these off the internet at this point, but this has got to count for something, at least. If you want a bona fide, there it is. And I'm telling you, this is my testimony here, okay? Using a challenge coin and probably one of the only legitimate uses for a challenge coin. US-4A was so risk averse, they were giving these out for people who did exceptionally okay targeting, I guess. So you're going to sit there and tell me that targeting is so rare that I get one of these, and this guy is saying that we did so much targeting that we killed hundreds of civilians in a day? I don't know, man. It doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound like it. It doesn't add up. Okay, it's just. I'm not saying that it didn't happen. I'm just saying that at the time, it was so stringent that they're giving these out for targeting Big Army side. So why are you mentioning US-4A when SOTF-A, Special Operations Task Force Afghanistan, SOTF-A, the dudes you were working for, they were the ones doing all the targeting that was kind of questionable. ANSOF. A lot of mainstream media news articles were written about ANSOF doing sketchy stuff. So why point the finger at Big Army when Big Army was the least likely guy in the room to do anything with regards to CivCAS? I don't know. It just doesn't make any sense. Another thing, by the way, is a little side note that's just kind of glossed over, I guess. But if you sit down and you break this text down, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense because of this. So I don't know if my abduction attempt is related to either. Abduction attempt? What are you talking about? This is the first time that you've mentioned possibly being abducted. So I don't know. This is very, very, very sketchy. So let me come back to that first slide here and talk about kind of the overall impact here. At the very bottom of the email here, he says, you need to elevate this to the media so we avoid a world war because this is a mutually assured destruction situation. My final point that I would like to make is that if you wanted to stoke a world war, this is exactly the kind of email that you would put out. Okay, this is not something that you would whistleblow to prevent a world war. This is the kind of thing that you would whistleblow to start a world war. Okay, especially after all the hysteria on the East Coast. Okay, so this guy knew about this at least since I mean he was in the know allegedly. I don't know how, but he was allegedly in the know for several years now, and only after the New Jersey thing do we start talking about this. Now, there's many ways of explaining that away, I suppose. But really, my overall point is this. Look, this is it. This is what you give. You're going to sit there and try to give us world-bending information, the things that shake the foundations of governments, okay? You're going to try to whistleblow something that is so world-changing that it's just incomprehensible. And this short email with inconsistencies throughout is the best you can do. This is the best you can do. How is it that I am the bad guy for looking at this with suspicion? You had to have known that anyone looking at this from the outside is going to result in a lot of suspicion. Okay? So it would behoove anyone who tries to do something similar in the future in terms of whistleblowing or whatever to give a little bit more context. Okay, learn from this, because I don't understand it, but apparently the rules of the internet are that I'm the bad guy for looking at this and thinking this is all very, very, very sketchy. Are some parts of this email true? Yeah, probably. Are some parts of it false? Undoubtedly so. So where do we go from there, right? Now, again, I said in the beginning that I wanted to be delicate about this sort of thing, and I really do. I don't mean to disrespect the last words of a dead man, okay? I don't mean to do that. I was perfectly happy to let this one go and just do my own analysis, do my own thing, and let it kind of simmer down for a while. But that's not how it worked out, is it? The internet got hold of it, and now I have to walk back, or I feel it's somewhat my responsibility, I guess, because I have these informational things, right? I have this knowledge, so I feel like it's my responsibility to point out the inconsistencies in this. Please do not think that I'm trying to be, disrespectful in any way towards this guy. I don't know what happened. I don't know. I really don't know. I can tell you that the FBI and the Fed's narrative is probably not true, but this is also probably not true either. This email probably came from him, and I have no doubt, for instance, that the Sean Ryan Show people, they probably genuinely believe this email is genuine. Sam Shoemade got this email legitimately. Fine, all well and good. So we can really agree, pretty much, with fairly high confidence, that this email was written by Matt Livelsberger. And I don't doubt for 1 minute that Matt Livelsberger thought this stuff. I think that he thought it was true. I just have very serious reservations as to whether or not it is. So, again, I'm not going to address the more serious things that people are drawn to, the gravitic propulsion systems. I'm not going to address that because it's out of my wheelhouse. I have no expertise in this. Okay? So I don't want to go down that path if I don't have any experience in it. Okay? I have no ability to talk intelligently about any of this. But I could talk about the Afghanistan stuff, and I could talk about some of the things that don't make any sense, just from within the email itself, okay? So, for what it's worth, that's pretty much what I think of this. And again, not to be indelicate, but I really didn't want to sit here and trash the last words of a man who deserves some respect, right? I didn't mean to do that. I don't want to do that. But we're dealing with bigger things here. Okay? This guy himself made this an issue. Okay? This guy brought these claims. Okay? I would have preferred if he had been around so we could discuss it. I really wish that was the case. But it's not. And because of that, we have to be aware of two things, don't we? We have to be aware, first and foremost, that there is no rebuttal from the dead. Okay? If this guy is dead, truly and genuinely, and these are his last words, he can't refute any negative things we say about him. So we have to be very careful about that. Very careful about that, because he can't respond, right? And also, because of that, and a little bit, less serious nature, because of this, we can't really ask follow-up questions, and I have a lot of them. So we just have to kind of treat this with a little bit differently than you might think. That's why a lot of times, in many states, just stepping outside the realm into like regular law enforcement, the deathbed confessions of people get the last statements right before they die are treated differently in court. They're given more weight in some cases because, well, it's a very serious thing. It's a very serious time. So if that's the case here as well, we have to be mindful of that. So again, Master Sergeant Livelsberger has brought this. He sent this to the people who brought it to the forefront of the internet, and now hundreds of millions of people are going to be dissecting this on their own, in their own head, and what this information means. So this is not something that I did. I did not create this. I did not do this. This is Master Sergeant Livelsberger who did this. So I felt the need to kind of share some of the things that I think with the goal of getting to the truth, right? Unfortunately, sometimes the truth is inconvenient. Sometimes it's disrespectful. Sometimes it's not good. But we have to get to the truth, okay? Because these are serious things this guy's trying to claim. So I hope that over the next few weeks, we can get to that truth. But in the meantime, let's take a look at what we can do next. So what can we do? Well, in the short term, we can be prepared for more wild information. Again, anytime a very fascinating, strange, unorthodox kind of situation comes out, you're going to have hundreds of thousands of additional people coming out and saying this, that, or the other. And it's going to be just an absolute shotgun blast of information, almost all of which is going to be complete and utter hogwash, right? So we have to be prepared for that. Slip into the mode of being, taking more things with a grain of salt than normal. This is something that I think is kind of important because really we don't want to make decisions that are very, very serious based off of information that's potentially false, right? So that kind of rolls into the next point. Risk assessment and mitigation is absolutely crucial when you don't trust anybody, okay? I don't expect anybody to trust me. I'm not asking anyone to trust me. I'm sure not asking anybody to trust anybody else, okay? Reputations don't matter. What matters in the world of social media now? The evidence, okay? The raw data and being able to infer and discern information, extrapolate a thesis from multiple data points. That's what matters now. I am not ignorant of this. I'm aware of this. And because of this, we have to be more data-centric, okay, in our risk assessment, right? Essentially, don't panic buy anything. Don't go out and start buying a lot of stuff you don't need just because of this incident. Give it a couple of weeks, okay? This incident is years in the making, okay? This strange New Year's Day event, okay, has not sped up the timeline for this, okay? If the guy is making claims that are accurate, then this has been going on for a long time, and it's probably going to continue for a long time, if any of this is remotely true. So again, this is not an emergency. This is a short-term reaction to a long-term problem, and you don't want to make a lot of short-term decisions based on long-term problems. And finally, flexibility. Flexibility is going to be important, and this is one of the things that's kind of hard to do, right? Because we don't want to be slipping into living in, like an emergency code red mode at all times. We want to enjoy life, right? We want to have a normal, quasi-normal life. So being at threat level midnight forever is not a good idea. But understanding that you may have situations which are more high risk than others, well, that's something that we should all kind of be considering for sure, right? So that's pretty much all I have on that. I know that there's going to be a lot of information come out, some of it good, some of it bad. And I think the next week is going to be very, very telling. And I really just want to kind of set the stage for encouraging people to think for themselves, think on their own, think a little bit more deliberately, right? And not just go off of either someone's reputation or so on and so forth. That's going to be something that happens no matter what to some degree, but really keeping our heads on right, doing the best that we can, trying to do what we've always done, right? And better ourselves every day. That's a good move forward no matter what. No matter what serious thing comes out of the news, doing that is probably a good idea. So let's wrap things up today with the GhostNet Reports. Again, a great time for hopping on alternative communications platforms. And this week there were a lot of people. Despite the fact I thought there would not be. I thought there would not be a whole lot of people at all because of solar weather. Solar weather has been really bad this week. I had a couple of CMEs, coronal mass ejections this week, and I thought that it was just going to be really bad solar conditions. Turns out it wasn't. Really good propagation. So very strange, very interesting. Radio is always kind of like that, right? But again, a lot of news reports here. A couple of questions even. One of them was, where can I find info on GhostNet Mesh beyond the GhostNet PDF? That's pretty much the only place right now where you can find a thing that you can read, but you can always message me, right? If you want more information on it. But really, it's just a Meshtastic channel for the GhostNet. I'm still working on it. Give me some time. And yeah, the next question is it okay to ask JS8 setup questions in here? I'm new to digital and don't know if I'm running too much power or gain. Yeah, sure. Ask questions. That's what it's all about. Yeah, absolutely. It would be great if you're trying to learn how to do this, be a little bit early. Show up a little bit early to the time window, which this time of year is 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and on Thursdays. And yeah, show up a couple hours early, check in, do some heartbeats, things like that. And yeah, you'll always find somebody who's willing to help you answer questions. So that's pretty much all I have for today. Again, sorry if this has been kind of a weird week. I'm not creating this world events myself, really, honestly. So I guess we just kind of got to react to things and take in information as best we can. So I will leave the sources this time in the links in the description box below because there are not that many. Again, single source reporting, can't do a lot with it, right? But we can definitely take a look ourselves and see what we can learn, maybe and adjust our risk assessment as necessary, right? So again, thank you all for watching. Thank you all for putting up with my harebrained theories this time, and we will see you next time. And as always, fight in the shade.